Hello everyone, Blizzard has announced the first set of tuning coming up in March 17th. So there will be some buffs to warriors, so let's go through them. So before we go into the buffs, I guess, let's talk about Piercing Howl here. This is the first change. They are increasing the cooldown of Piercing Howl from 30 seconds to 90 seconds. The ally speed buff radius has been reduced as well. I wonder if they are keeping the long slow range as well then, because if you have been playing with Piercing Howl with Battlefield Commander, 24 yards AoE slow range is actually quite annoying because you just pull everything. It's 24 yards is a really long range. Like when I was using this in the open world and in dungeons, I kept ninja pulling stuff or pulling stuff I didn't want to pull whenever I used Piercing Howl, and I wanted to use as a speed buff. But anyway, I was mostly using it as a speed buff and not an enemy slow. And as a speed buff, it's only 30%, which is less than things like Windrush Totem and Stampeding Roar. So it felt like a 30-second cooldown, and that was fair. So I was still using it, but I wasn't like super impressed with it. With it being a 90-second cooldown, I think I'll just never talent it anymore unless I really need the slow as a niche slow tool. I'll probably take Intimidating Shout instead in M+, or maybe even Fearless, or occasionally Berserker Shot, because you do need to take one of them to get to double time. Moving on to the buffs then, so Arms is getting buffs finally, well needed buffs, and first up is a change to our Apex talent. So it's the final rank of our Apex. Currently, it is Heroic Strike reduces the cooldown of Colossus Smash by 2 seconds. This old one was actually really problematic because it would cause a desync between Colossus Smash and Avatar, because usually anger management and the natural cooldown of Colossus Smash and Avatar would line up naturally. But with the Apex thrown into the mix, Colossus Smash would not line up with Avatar, which was a problem. And that's why it just wasn't really worth taking, and we were picking another talent within our normal class tree instead of taking the final rank in Apex. So they are buffing it by changing it to Heroic Strike now increases the damage that you deal to your Colossus Smash targets by an additional 3%. So that stacks up to 5 times as well. That's a really good change. Happy with that. That now won't have the desync issue with cooldown wise. And also all damage dealt increased by 15%. So that's a nice big buff for Arms. But surprisingly enough, it's not enough. Arms was so far behind on single target due to repeated nerfs on the PTR and now on live as well, that this isn't really gonna help Arms enough. It's still gonna suck. It is gonna be still good at AoE, but single target is still really bad. Before it got these buffs, it was seeming similar to tanks on single target. There were some tanks that were way ahead, but yeah, the average tank Arms seemed the same on single target as them. So yeah, this isn't quite enough. Hopefully Arms will get some more buffs. Blizzard said that they were going to be quite aggressive when it came to tuning in the first few weeks of the season, so let's hope that they can revive Arms. Okay, moving on to Fury. So Fury is getting all damage dealt increased by 10%. So a flat 10% buff to all our damage abilities, which is nice, really nice. And Slayer, for some reason, is getting a nerf to Reap the Storm. Bloodthirst chance to proc Reap the Storm is reduced from 30% to 20%. I don't really know why, because Slayer was already doing worse than Thane in AoE. So it doesn't make sense for this to be nerfed in the first place, I think, because it was already worse. So I guess they just really don't want us to play Slayer for whatever reason. A lot of people have been asking what hero spec we should be playing in the raid, Thane or Slayer. And because Slayer and Thane are so close on single target, and Thane is significantly better in AoE, I think we'll probably play Thane on most bosses in the raid, because there are no single target bosses in that raid. There are only bosses with ads or AoE. Of course, there is a possibility that Slayer's damage profile might be better than Thane's on certain fights, and you'll choose to play Slayer because of that. We'll just have to wait and see what people end up doing. I'll be watching the Race to World first, and I'll make my decision from that probably, and maybe check some logs as well. But my prediction is probably Thane for most, maybe some niche uses for Slayer. So there is this sim spreadsheets. I don't know how accurate it is, but the numbers here are correct, at least for for Warrior. You can see how weak Arms is still looking even after that big 15% buff and the Apex buff as well. And Fury doesn't look that impressive here, but we'll just have to wait and see how it actually plays out, because like I said, none of the bosses in the raid are pure single target. Blizzard has also posted some development notes for patch 12.0.5. So this is going to be the mid-season patch, so we probably won't see this for a couple of months. But they have made some changes on the PTR now here, and some of them are very questionable. So let's talk about them. So first up is Mortal Wounds now triggers for Mortal Strike and Slam, and it was Mortal Strike and Cleave. So that's this talent here. So Mortal Strike and Cleave crits apply deep wounds. It's just going to be Slam instead of Cleave now. So that will effectively be an AoE nerf, which is fine for Arms, I would say. It does need help on single target, so this change will help a little bit on single target, although not that much. So I'm okay with that change. Practice strikes for Colossus now increases Mortal Strike and Slam damage. So this is weirdly worded. So Mortal Strike and Slam damage by 15% and Cleave and Whirlwind damage by 15%. I don't know why it doesn't just list all four and then 15%, but okay, fine. Moving on, this is what I'm really unhappy about. These two lines here. So many people mistakenly read this as a buff. It is not a buff. They are changing Reap the Storm. So Reap the Storm now triggers when Whirlwind or Cleave hits 3 or more targets. Chance to trigger reduced to 15%, was 20. And Imminent Demise no longer causes sudden death to trigger Reap the Storm. So currently, Reap the Storm can be procced from Mortal Strike or Cleave hits, or whenever you're consuming a sudden death proc. Sudden death procs was a guaranteed Reap the Storm proc. But now, the only way for you to ever proc Reap the Storm is from hitting Whirlwind or Cleave on 3 or more targets. That means Reap the Storm will barely do any damage, because it's hardly ever going to proc. This is really bad for Slayer. Really bad news for Slayer. So I don't understand why they're making this change. Sudden death, proccing Reap the Storm feels so good right now, right? Previously, before they made it so that sudden death proc Reap the Storm, it just felt like you were wasting a global cooldown pressing execute, because it just hits a single target, and you're wasting time not pressing AoE abilities. And it just felt super satisfying to get a sudden death proc, which proc Reap the Storm. But now they're removing that altogether, and now there's only an RNG chance to proc it when you press Whirlwind or Cleave on 3 or more targets specifically, so it will never proc on single target anymore, actually. I don't understand this change. It's a severe downgrade in playstyle, I would say. So I think Slayer is kind of dead unless they revert this change or give it major buffs. But I would prefer that they would just revert the change, because this is just a downgrade in playstyle. Even if they compensate with damage buffs, it's not going to make up for the fact that it's going to be less interesting to play. Moving on, Unrelenting Onslaught now also increases Bladestorm damage by 20%, which is a good change, but still, Bladestorm doesn't actually do that much damage by itself. 20% is nice to it, but it will nowhere near make up for the loss of Reap the Storm damage, because Reap the Storm was a large part of our damage, and it won't be with this change. Moving on to Fury. So Hack and Slash has been redesigned. Rampage has a 100% chance to refund the charge of Raging Blow. So currently, Hack and Slash has a chance per Rampage hit to refund the charge of Raging Blow. So instead of it being RNG per hit, it's now just casting Rampage has a 100% chance to refund 1 charge of Raging Blow. So I think that's a good change. Instead of making it RNG, it is just a consistent 1 charge per Rampage cast. It's kind of whatever also though, because Raging Blow is a very weak ability at this point, because we're speccing into Bloodthirst. We're committing a lot of points into Bloodthirst, not Raging Blow, and they nerfed a lot of Raging Blow over the course of the beta, so it's now just been downgraded to a filler ability. So I guess this is nice for the future if they ever bring back Raging Blow or buff it somehow. Improved Whirlwind now causes Whirlwind to apply Rend to all targets if Rend is known. That's actually really good, because it was kind of crap as Slayer to have Rend, because it didn't interact with the kit in any way. You would have to stop using your normal abilities just to reapply rend every 18 seconds. Sorry, every 15 seconds. Especially in AoE it was important, and on single target it was worth doing by a little bit. Barely worth it, but it is worth it nonetheless. So it was annoying to have to press rend manually. Now it will just be automatically applied whenever you press Whirlwind, so that means it will be naturally applied to all targets all the time when you're cleaving, and on single target it also will be naturally applied sometimes. Okay, moving on. So here's that same change again to Reap the Storm. Reap the Storm now triggers when Whirlwind hits 3 or more targets. Chance to trigger reduced to 15%, was 30. Imminent Demise no longer causes sudden death to trigger Reap the Storm. So now Reap the Storm can only trigger when Whirlwind hits 3 or more targets. Bloodthirst no longer procs it, and sudden death uses doesn't trigger it either. So yeah, that is a massive deal, because Reap the Storm often was our top damage or near top damage in AoE. That won't be the case with this change, even if you make a build where you spam Whirlwind, which sounds awful, by the way. Yeah. Same buff to Bladestorm here, which is more useful to Fury than it is for arms. But yeah, that's it. So again, just to recap, really, really, really unhappy with this layer change. I really hope Blizzard reverts this, because this is an awful change in my mind, and everyone that I've spoken to agrees. So yeah, let's see what happens. It is only PTR after all, but I'm really worried that they're actually going to go ahead with this. So that's all I got for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in Season 1.